Hi, Nan Jensen here. This is video number 6 about property managers and property administrators. Before we get started, I just want to mention the disclaimer. The videos contain legal information, not legal advice. If you need legal advice, you need to consult or talk to a lawyer. You need to tell them your whole situation, and you need to get a letter of engagement. So don't rely on anything you hear in these videos because you need specific information about your specific situation. Now, to get on to the topic, property managers and property administrators, just going back to what we talked about a few videos ago, the Protection of Personal and Property Rights Act. So you may remember that under guardianship, both personal care and welfare and property were included. But when we talk about adults and this act, then personal care and welfare is separate from property. So welfare guardians deal with personal care and welfare, and property managers and property administrators deal with property. So what is property? Well, it's not just land and buildings. Property is everything you own. So your money in the bank, your teddy bear, your furniture, you may own shares, your KiwiSaver. All of those things include property. And it might even be if you've loaned somebody money, that's actually property as well. That's an asset of yours. So just the application process is actually the same as for Welfare Guardian. And when I do them, we do a combined application. So most of the documents, you don't need to do them twice. But if you're doing it yourself and you're using the Ministry of Justice paperwork, then they seem to require 2 separate applications. I'm not really sure why. I guess it's to make it less complicated. But it is a similar process, and similar to with Welfare Guardians, your first order is 3 years. When you apply for review, then you're likely to get 5, but it really depends on the circumstances of the situation. Similarly, there's a lawyer appointed for the subject person. All of those things are the same. The differences are that you can have 2 property managers, but only 1 property administrator, and I'll talk about the difference between those 2 in a minute. Property managers have more responsibilities, and they also have more powers. Property managers are actually for situations where people have a lot of assets, and property administrators are where the person doesn't have a lot of assets. Now, there can be 2 property managers. There can only be 1 property administrator. So just to talk about property managers briefly, the threshold between property manager and property administrator is $5,000 in assets. So if they have over $5,000, then you need to be a property manager. Otherwise, you can be a property administrator. And there also needs to be a maximum of $20,000 in income. So I've started running into situations, because these numbers haven't changed in a while, where beneficiaries, even though they're only on a WINS benefit, are making slightly over $20,000 because they're getting supplementary benefits, and that means that the person managing their assets suddenly has to be a property manager. Now, why is that a problem? It's because property managers have to file reports with the court, so they need to account for what they're doing with the money, and that means that they have to do a report 3 months after they've been appointed, and that one's just a report on what assets they've discovered the person has, because they can't really find out until they have the authority. And then after that, they have to report annually on the anniversary of the appointment. Now, recently there have been changes to legislation, so it was always required to make those reports, but now the legislation actually provides for quite serious penalties if you don't report, and if you don't report in a timely manner. And that can include being put in jail. So that's why people would often prefer to be a property administrator, so they don't have to go through that. Now, even if you're a property administrator, you need to try to manage the person's money properly, and you need to be prepared for the fact that you could have to account for what you've done with it. So I have run into people who do things like taking cash out of the subject person's account, or transferring money into their own account and then paying the bills from that. And that's fine as long as you keep track of receipts and things like that, but it's a whole lot easier if you set things up so that there are automatic payments out of the person's account directly that show exactly where the money went, because then there's no risk of you being accused of having done anything inappropriate, and you don't have as much trouble trying to prepare your reports. The reports are audited by the public trust, and there can be a charge for that. It's not something you as a property manager has to pay, but it's something that has to be paid out of the person's assets. But that is something to be aware of, and the charges will vary depending on the level of assets of the person. Now, one other thing that's starting to come up is because of KiwiSaver, some people are finding that the subject person is pushed into property manager territory, even though the KiwiSaver is just sitting there, and that's a little bit unfortunate. But unless you don't expect to do anything with those KiwiSaver funds, and most people don't, they need to be included in the order. And remembering that KiwiSaver providers are quite strict, so often they won't talk to you at all. Usually they won't talk to anyone who doesn't have legal authority, even if it's just about changing a mailing address. So you have to be quite careful before you try to get KiwiSaver excluded from a court order. So the other thing is property managers, even though they have authority over larger amounts of money, there are things they can and can't do. So each order is going to have very specific powers in it, depending on the specific circumstances of the subject person. So for example, if they were running a business, then the property manager will probably get the authority to continue running the business. If there wasn't one, then that's probably not going to be amongst the powers. Now, regardless of being property manager or not, for example, let's say Great Aunt Maud dies and leaves the subject person a legacy. That in order to do anything with that money, if it's a large amount, so I don't know, it could be $100,000, and you think it would be good to, or you discussed with the subject person and agreed that you want to buy a house for them to live in, you're still going to have to apply to the court for permission to make that transaction. And that can be quite complicated because sometimes you can't wait several months for the court to decide before you put a bid on a property. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but that's one of the rules about property management. So when we talk about wills, we'll talk about the fact that it might be a good idea to have a chat with Great Aunt Maud about whether it's smart to leave money directly to the subject person, or perhaps to leave it into a trust, because then the trustees can make those decisions without having to ask permission from the court. So we'll talk about that more in the videos about wills and about trusts. But in any case, it's important to understand that just because you're a property manager, you can't just do whatever you want with the subject person's money. Aside from the fact that you're going to have to report on it, there are many transactions that will require permission from the court. So that's all something to discuss with a lawyer. If you know that these things are going to happen, you should make the application along with the application to be property manager. And if something comes up later, then it needs to be dealt with as it comes along. These applications don't go through the court quickly because obviously the court's more concerned with things like domestic violence than some sort of property transaction. So it's unlikely that you can get a quick decision out of the court on something like that. So I think we've covered everything about that. Just remember again that this isn't just about disabled people, because if you are an able-bodied person, you have an accident and you lose capacity and you haven't done a power of attorney already, then somebody may have to become your property manager or property administrator. So this is why I'm hoping lots of people will listen to these videos, and not just people who have disabled family members. And I don't mean to sound like I'm advertising for powers of attorney or for lawyers to make money on it, but it's really important for people to get their legal things in order. Okay, I think that's about all that I have to say about this one. If I remember something else, I'll say it in the next video. Thanks for listening, and next one will be about enduring powers of attorney. That will be video 7. Thanks for listening.